The chandeliers above the Grand Astoria ballroom shimmered like 1,000 frozen teardrops, casting prisms of light across champagne flutes, polished marble, and silk gowns. The annual Echelon Gala was a jewel box of New York's elite. Everyone who mattered, and those desperate to pretend they did. Cameras lined the velvet rope outside. Inside, the atmosphere hummed with soft jazz and quiet ambition. Julian Maris stood near the open bar, swirling untouched bourbon in his glass. His tuxedo was immaculate. So was his posture. At 37, he was a billionaire tech mogul, a walking headline of disruption and dominance. But tonight, something gnawed at him. Maybe the room, maybe the pressure to smile for another 100 cameras, or maybe the empty space to his left. It had been 3 years since she vanished. 3 years since that final conversation in his penthouse. The one where Elena had said the word that fractured everything. Pregnant. He never asked her what she planned to do. He had just shut down. Detached. Offered a wire transfer and a cold goodbye, all wrapped in a monologue about timing and risk and legacy. And then, she was gone. No forwarding address, no social media, no public appearances. Not a single word, until now. Across the ballroom, just past a cluster of hedge fund aristocrats and political donors, he saw her. Silver. That was the first thing he noticed. A floor-length silver gown that caught the light like starlight, tailored to her curves but elegant. Timeless. Her hair was longer now, cascading in waves, and her presence was unmistakable. She moved through the crowd like she belonged. Like she wasn't a ghost he had long buried behind code and quarterly reports. His heart stalled. Elena. She hadn't seen him yet. Or maybe she had, and simply didn't care. She was speaking to a museum curator, glass of water in hand, posture poised. Her smile came easy, but her eyes, not to him. Her eyes had once been warm oceans. Now they looked like glass, still unreadable. Julian stepped forward, something primal tugging at him. But then, a small hand slipped into hers. He stopped mid-stride. From behind her stepped a little boy, no older than 3. Clutching her gown with one hand, he held a half-eaten macaron in the other. Light brown curls, wide blue-gray eyes. The child looked up, and Julian's glass hit the floor. The shatter wasn't loud, just enough to turn a few heads. A waiter swooped in with practiced grace and a polite smile, whispering reassurances as he swept the shards into a dustpan. Julian didn't respond. He was frozen, because in that child's face he saw something he hadn't seen in years. Himself. The boy had his eyes, his expression when startled, even the way he stood, chin slightly raised, like the world needed proving wrong. The room spun. For the first time in a decade, Julian Maris didn't know what to say. He looked back up at Elena. She had seen him now. Her gaze met his. Direct, unblinking. And in that split second, he saw no fear, no apology, just resolve. She gently guided the boy toward the far corridor away from the crowd, her pace calm, her hand never tightening, never trembling. Julian took one step after her, then stopped. A security guard, oblivious to the emotional collapse unraveling across the room, stepped between them to open the side doors. She disappeared into the hallway. The boy followed. The door closed behind them. Julian stood alone under crystal light, the bourbon stain drying on the marble beside him, and all he could hear were her last words echoing through time. "You don't want this baby, Julian, but I do." Before the headlines, before the 7-figure acquisitions and Forbes lists, before Elena became a phantom in Julian's life. She was the one person who saw him without blinking. They met at a gallery opening in Soho. He had been dragged there by a venture capitalist friend who wanted to impress someone. Elena was standing by a large canvas, her fingers still stained with charcoal. The painting was hers, an abstract rendering of 2 figures barely touching, suspended in shades of midnight and blood orange. Julian hadn't been impressed by art in years. But that night, something about her presence, unfiltered, curious, had pulled him in. She didn't recognize his name immediately. She didn't care about IPOs or burn rates. She asked him questions that had nothing to do with money. He hadn't realized how badly he needed that. The months that followed were like nothing he'd known. Mornings at her cramped studio in Brooklyn Heights, where she worked barefoot on drop cloths. Late nights at his penthouse where she'd lie in bed tracing constellations on his chest with her fingertip. They were mismatched but magnetic. She grounded him. He gave her space to breathe, financially at first, then emotionally. But slowly, his world began to press back in. Meetings, jet lag, investors, prototypes, and cracks. It was late September when she told him. She was standing in his kitchen barefoot, hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. Her voice was quiet. Not afraid, just careful. "I'm pregnant." He blinked, unsure he'd heard her right. "I took the test 3 times. It's real." Silence stretched across the marble island between them. He didn't move. He didn't touch her. He stared, as if the news was a glitch in his carefully coded life. "You're sure?" Her eyes flinched. "Yes, Julian, I'm sure." He ran a hand through his hair, stepping away. "This isn't the right time." She set the mug down slowly. "There's never a right time for people like you." He didn't respond. Instead, he walked into his office and came back with an envelope. She didn't open it. "What is this?" "Support," he said. "You won't have to worry. You think this is about money? It's about solving something before it becomes public, before it becomes messy." That word, messy, landed like acid. Her voice broke then, not loud but final. "You don't want this baby, Julian, but I do." He didn't stop her when she left, didn't chase, didn't follow. The next day, her studio was empty. The week after, her website was down. Her phone disconnected. Friends said she'd moved out of state. Some thought she'd gone back to Chicago. Others said she'd started fresh in Portland. No one knew for sure. And Julian? He threw himself into expansion. He doubled the staff, tripled the press, built an empire of distraction, and convinced himself she'd made her choice. But in the quiet moments, when the press was gone, when the deals were signed, he sometimes imagined her on a train, hand on her belly, eyes locked, on some unknown horizon, and he wondered if she ever looked back. The ballroom noise dulled to a low thrum in Julian's ears as he stood motionless beside the shattered remains of his bourbon glass. Around him, conversation floated past like muffled, radio static, laughter, champagne flutes clinking, the soft brush of dresses sweeping across marble. None of it reached him, because across the room Elena was walking again, shoulders squared, gaze forward. Graceful, measured, and at her side, the boy. Julian couldn't look away. The child's hair was a sandy gold, tousled, curling slightly, above his ears. His skin was pale with a faint olive undertone, and his face, Julian felt it like a gut punch, was unmistakable. Blue-gray eyes. His eyes, the same slope in the brow, the same way the mouth turned down slightly in concentration, the same stubborn chin. The boy was maybe 3, maybe a little younger, small but confident. He walked beside Elena like he belonged to the moment, not clinging, not hiding, just there. Julian's heartbeat drummed in his ears. He took a step toward them, then froze again. Elena stopped at the far end of the room, speaking to an older woman in a navy dress. The boy slipped his hand into hers, gazing up, curious but quiet. He glanced around the room, bored. Then his eyes landed on Julian, and locked. For a moment, time snapped. Julian had faced reporters, boardroom takeovers, corporate betrayal, but nothing compared to the weight of being seen by this small, wordless stranger. The boy tilted his head as if trying to place him. Then slowly, he smiled. It was brief. Barely there. But it gutted Julian, because he remembered that smile. He'd worn it once in the mirror of a childhood bedroom, back before the world had expectations. before ambition made him choose image over intimacy. Before her. Elena looked up, saw Julian, again. This time their eyes held, and this time she didn't turn away. There was no panic in her face, no shame, only a flicker of recognition. And beneath that, something far more powerful. Control. Not the brittle, anxious kind, the kind born from surviving. She said nothing. Her lips remained still. But in her gaze, he read the sentence anyway. Yes, he's yours, but he's not your responsibility anymore. Julian took one cautious step forward. Elena lifted her chin. The boy tugged at her dress. She knelt beside him, brushing his hair behind his ear. Whispered something Julian couldn't hear. Then she stood, her fingers tightening gently around the child's hand. And just like that, she turned away. Julian felt something hollow open inside him. Not rage, not regret. Something deeper. Something almost like awe. He had expected shame. Tears. Maybe a plea for acknowledgement. But what he got was far more unsettling. Independence. He watched them walk toward the rear hallway, past the gallery, doors and into the corridor that led to the elevators. A staff member opened the door. Elena nodded her thanks. The boy glanced back just once. Julian didn't move, didn't chase, didn't speak. He stood alone in the ballroom, heart echoing, mind scrambling. This wasn't the return he had imagined. It was a reckoning. And it had arrived, with small footsteps and unspoken eyes. Elena hadn't packed much when she left Manhattan. A suitcase, a worn sketchbook, a bag of prenatal vitamins, and the last sliver of a heart she'd fought to keep from shattering. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Not her friends, not her gallery, and definitely not Julian. She used cash, turned off her phone, disconnected the website that once housed her portfolio and her name. By the time the pregnancy started, to show Elena Vasquez no longer existed, she reappeared 3 states away under a name plucked from the spine of a poetry book in a used bookstore. Ella Martin. It sounded unremarkable, safe, the kind of name you could carry into a maternity ward without anyone looking twice. She checked into a women's shelter first, not because she was broke, but because she needed to feel invisible. They gave her a bed, hot soup, and silence. That's all she needed. The night her son was born, the nurse asked if she wanted to list the father. Elena shook her head. No, just me. She named him Lucas, after her grandfather, the one who used to say even storms pass, mi cielo. The early months were hard. Her body ached in places no one prepared her for. Her hands barely kept up with the feedings, the rent, the sense of isolation that crept in like water under a door. But Lucas was good, gentle, quiet, the kind of baby who stared into your soul like he'd seen you somewhere before. And when he smiled, she forgot to miss what she lost. She picked up work painting murals for a small nonprofit daycare. She never signed her name. Then, one of the administrators noticed her technique. They connected her with a fellowship for single mothers in the arts, a scholarship that came with childcare and studio access. It was the first door that opened without Julian's name attached. She walked through it like someone discovering breath. Again. Years passed. Lucas grew. She painted, not like before, not the large, haunting abstracts she used to hang in Soho galleries. These were smaller, intimate. Scenes from memories she didn't say out loud. A hand letting go of another. A pair of shoes left outside a door. A man holding an umbrella under a storm, but standing dry, untouched. She painted with silence. Sold, under E. Martin, and never looked back. Until the letter came. From a private museum in New York, inviting her to submit work to a charity gala exhibition. They'd seen one of her pieces at a collector's studio in San Francisco. They offered to cover all travel and accommodations. No press, no obligations. It took her 3 days to say yes, not because she wanted revenge, but because she had nothing to hide anymore. She stepped into the gala in silver, Not for vanity, but because it reminded her of armor. Soft. Unbreakable. She knew he would be there. She hoped he would. Because this time she wasn't coming to beg. She was coming to be seen, on her own terms, with her son beside her, and no one else's name in the credits. Julian didn't go back to the gala after she vanished, down the hallway. He slipped out the side exit into the night, ignoring the waiting car and walking instead. The winter wind cut through his coat, but he barely noticed. Her face, the boy's eyes, the curve of that smile, haunted him with every step. By the time he reached his penthouse, he was drenched in sweat under layers of tailored wool, and a headache had taken root behind his eyes. He dropped his keys, kicked off his shoes, and headed straight for his home office. The room was pristine, everything always in its place, but something inside him itched to pull the past into the light. Powered on his desktop, hands slightly trembling, it took him a moment to remember the password. Then he opened a folder he hadn't clicked in 3 years. Drafts. There it was. Subject, I don't know how to say this. Sent, never. He clicked it open. The body of the message stared back at him. Raw. Unpolished, written 2 nights after she left. Elena, you were right, I panicked. That doesn't excuse what I did, but it's the only truth I have right now. I thought I was protecting my career, my name, my investors. But what I really protected was my fear. I'm sorry. I know that's not enough. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I wanted you to know if the child is mine, I never stopped wondering. Never stopped thinking of you. I just didn't know how to reach out without becoming the villain all over again. Julian, he'd never clicked send. Pride had stopped him, so had cowardice. And now it was too late to be the first to speak. The next morning, Julian couldn't focus. The office felt suffocating. He canceled meetings, claiming jet lag. Instead, he pulled up every database he had access to, legal, financial, public records. He searched for her. Elena Vasquez. Nothing new. No address. No updated license. But when he cross-checked a recent artist submission list for the Echelon Gala, a new name emerged. E. Martin, Brooklyn-based. No social profiles. No official photo. But when he clicked on the gallery profile, he found a thumbnail of a painting, dark, expressive, and unmistakably hers, the same strokes, the same movement. The caption read, Untitled, 2019, Private Collection, Oakland. He sat back in his chair. She hadn't just vanished, she had rebuilt, under another name, and kept his child a secret. He couldn't blame her, not really, but knowing it and seeing it were different animals. He leaned forward, hands steepled. There was more to this. Not just a child. Not just revenge. She'd changed identities, lived quietly, and refused even $1 from him. There had to be something else she wasn't saying. Something she was protecting. Julian clicked out of the profile, opened a secure messaging tab, typed to his private investigator, Find everything on E. Martin. Alias, address, schooling, art sales. And check any birth certificates filed under that name in New York or California 3 years ago. Quietly, he hesitated, then hit send. This wasn't about control anymore. It was about truth, even if it shattered what was left of the person he used to be. It started as a whisper, one headline buried deep in a local Manhattan gossip blog known more for brunch reviews than exposés. Tech billionaire Julian Maris allegedly fathered secret child. Sources claim gala appearance sparked internal panic. There were no photos, no names, just speculation. A shadowy quote from an unnamed source. He looked like he saw a ghost that night, and the ghost had a child. Julian read it on his phone just past 6:01 a.m., standing shirtless in his kitchen, coffee burning in the mug he hadn't touched. He didn't even finish the article. His blood ran cold. By 9:01 a.m., 3 of his board members had called emergency meetings. By noon, a financial blog had picked up the rumor. By 3:00 p.m., the company's stock had dipped nearly 4%. By 5 p.m., it was war. He called Elena. She didn't answer the first 2 times. The third time, she picked up. "You leaked it," he said without preamble. A beat of silence. "Hello to you too," she replied. "Don't play games. You know what I'm talking about." "The story?" she said, cool and measured. "Not me. You expect me to believe that? I didn't even have your last name listed on the birth certificate, Julian. Why would I start now?" He hesitated. She continued, voice harder now. "You think I'd drag my son into the press just to rattle you?" "Then who?" he asked, pacing the edge of his penthouse. Another pause. Then she said something that froze him in place. "I don't know, but someone's watching us. And it's not just you." She told him about the envelope that had appeared on her doorstep a week earlier. No note, just a printed photo of her and Lucas leaving daycare. Taken from a distance. She hadn't reported it. She hadn't even told Adele, her lawyer. She thought maybe it was Julian, a silent way to push her toward contact. But now, it felt different, intentional, predatory. Julian dropped into his chair, mind racing. If it wasn't her, who had something to gain? A former employee? An investor? Someone looking to destroy him from the inside? Or worse, someone who had been watching her all along? His fingers hovered over his keyboard. He sent a message to his head of security. Audit all camera footage from outside the gala. Cross-reference with media attendees. I want a full list of unknowns. Then, reluctantly, he messaged Elena again. We need to meet. In person. Somewhere secure. No press. Just us. We may not be the only ones in this story anymore. That night, as he stared out over the Manhattan skyline, Julian realized something terrifying. He wasn't just trying to uncover a hidden truth anymore. He was trying to stop someone else from weaponizing it, and that someone already had a head start. The gallery sat on the corner of a quiet Chelsea block, its exterior unassuming, brushed steel, frosted windows, a modest sign that read, Studio Meridian, E. Martin Solo Exhibition. Inside, the atmosphere pulsed with reverent tension. Art collectors, critics, and curious patrons milled around with glasses of rosé and murmured praise. But their voices lowered near one particular piece. It was near the back wall, beneath a soft amber spotlight. A large oil-on-canvas painting dominated the space, stark and aching. A man stood at the edge of a rooftop. His suit was torn, sleeves undone, face obscured in profile. In his arms, almost hidden within his coat, was a small infant, swaddled in grays and blues. Around them, the cityscape bled into blurred lines, skyscrapers dissolving into shadow and smoke. But what struck everyone silent was the man's posture. Not pride, not fear, something closer to surrender. Julian stood near the back of the room, jaw tight, hands in his pockets. No one recognized him, at least not obviously. He hadn't worn the usual armor, no tailored suit, no assistant, no entourage. Just a black jacket, dark jeans, and the weight of 1,000 unsaid things. He hadn't told Elena he would come. He wasn't sure she would have wanted him there. But after the anonymous tip, the headline, and her warning, he couldn't stay away. Something was unraveling, and it started here. At the center of the storm, Elena stood calm. A simple black dress, hair pulled back, eyes sharp. She greeted guests with poise, occasionally explaining a piece or offering a quiet laugh. But when she noticed Julian, she said nothing. She simply moved on. He found the painting last. He knew it was about him before he read the title. Inheritance. He stepped closer, ignoring the people whispering behind him. The infant's face wasn't detailed, but something about the eyes. The way the child was cradled, not possessively but protectively, hit Julian in the ribs. He had never held Lucas. Not once. But Elena had imagined it, painted it, preserved a version of him that could have been. Cameras flashed nearby, interrupting his thoughts. One photo, then another. Julian turned, shielding his face. But it wasn't the press. Not yet. It was a man standing in the corner. Tall. Late 40s. Salt and pepper beard. Long tan coat. Watching. Not the painting, not the crowd. But Elena. His posture was off, too stiff, too still. Julian narrowed his eyes. He didn't recognize the man, but something about him rang wrong. He wasn't a critic. He wasn't here for the art. Julian moved across the room, slowly, trying to keep the man in his peripheral vision. The stranger looked down at his phone, typed something, then slipped out, the front door as if he'd never been there. Gone. Just like that. Julian turned back to the painting, the rooftop, the child, the fall that never happened. He felt the chill of it seep into his bones. The past was catching up. Not just in oil and brushstroke, but in footsteps he hadn't heard yet, and eyes that didn't blink. The photo arrived on a Tuesday morning, sealed inside a nondescript beige envelope. No note, no return address. Just a single image printed on matte paper. Julian opened it with casual disinterest, assuming it was another pitch or invite, until he turned it over. It was Lucas. Standing outside his daycare, one hand holding a juice box, the other reaching toward the chain-link fence that separated the play yard from the sidewalk. He wasn't looking at the camera, but whoever took the photo had captured him clearly, like he was the subject of a case file. Julian stared at the image, ice crawling under his skin. This wasn't random. This was a warning. He dialed Elena immediately. She picked up after 3 rings. "It's me," he said. "You need to see something. If this is about the painting, it's about Lucas." A pause. Then, "What happened?" A photo of him outside the daycare. "It was sent to my office." Her breath caught. "Someone called the daycare yesterday," she said. "Asked about pickup times. Said they were a family friend. They hung up when the receptionist pushed for details." Julian was already standing, grabbing his keys. "Meet me at your apartment. I'm coming now." "Wait, Julian. We need to talk. Now." Elena opened the door before he could knock. She wore no makeup, hair tied back, eyes tired. Not from sleep, but from months, maybe years of carrying a threat in silence. Julian handed her the photo. She stared at it, jaw clenched. "I thought he was gone," she whispered. "Who?" She hesitated, then exhaled. "His name is Gary Trent. He was my landlord when I first moved out west." Nothing at first, just weird comments, odd glances. Then it got worse. Late-night knocks. Messages slipped under the door. "He followed me to a prenatal appointment once. Jesus. I filed a complaint. He claimed I was unstable. The building ignored me. I left in the middle of the night and never looked back. I didn't think he'd find me again." Julian stared at her, something between rage and protectiveness rising. "You should have told me." "Would you have listened?" she snapped. "Back then? You didn't even believe in the baby." He flinched, deservedly. "I'm listening now," he said quietly. An hour later, Julian sat in the back seat of a private security SUV, phone pressed to his ear. "His name is Gary Trent," he told his head of security. "Check for criminal complaints, restraining orders, known addresses. I want eyes on every building he stepped into in the last 2 years." "Copy that. Do we escalate to police?" "Not yet," Julian said. "Not until I know exactly what we're dealing with." He looked down at the photo again. Lucas, still smiling, unaware, a child who had never asked for any of this. That night, Julian installed private surveillance around Elena's building. Discreet, untraceable, quiet. He didn't ask for her permission. He just did it. And for once, she didn't fight him, because they both knew something now. This wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about who was watching them next. The confrontation happened in the unlikeliest place, an underground parking garage in Queens, 3 levels below the street, silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the low ping of a distant elevator. Gary Trent didn't look like a threat. That's what made it worse. He wore an old canvas jacket, jeans fraying at the knees, and a baseball cap pulled low over sunken eyes. But his hands, Julian noticed them immediately, were still. Too still. Like a man rehearsed, Julian had offered the meeting through a third party, feeding Gary a fake tip. A settlement offer for silence. Elena didn't want to be there, but she came anyway. Not because she trusted Julian, because she trusted no one else, to stand between her and her son. Gary approached slowly, eyes flicking between them. He smiled, but it didn't touch anything human. Didn't think you'd both show. That's sweet. Elena folded her arms, jaw tight. Say what you want. Gary tilted his head. No. First you say it, Mr. Maris. Say you remember me. Julian looked at him hard. You worked at Calathon 5 years ago. Project Interface. You were laid off. Gary's smile widened. See? Still sharp, even after climbing over all of us. You were let go during downsizing. I was erased, Gary snapped. One day I had a job, insurance, dignity. The next? Gone. Because your algorithm decided I wasn't scalable. Julian's voice hardened. There were hundreds of layoffs. You think that gives you the right to stalk a woman and her child? Gary looked to Elena now, eyes narrowing. She knew who you were. She knew what she was getting into. Gold digger playing, artist. Hiding the kid like some prize to cash in when the press got bored? Elena stepped forward before Julian could stop her. You watched my son, took photos, called his daycare. I was keeping tabs, Gary said simply. Someone has to. You left that boy to be raised in silence by a woman who paints her trauma on canvas and a man who buys his redemption. Julian's fist clenched. You don't know anything about us. Gary pulled something from his coat. Not a weapon. A folder. Inside, old employee emails. Photos of Julian and Elena from before the breakup. Printouts of articles speculating about Julian's mysterious past relationship. I've been collecting this for years, Gary said. Watching, waiting. All it takes is one leak to the right journalist. So this is blackmail, Julian muttered. Call it what you want, Gary said. But you don't get to walk away from the wreckage you made. Not this time. Julian stepped forward now, voice cold. What do you want? Gary paused. Then, oddly, he softened. I want to be remembered. Silence. It was Elena who broke it. Then get help. Because you're not remembered by destroying children. Gary's mouth twitched. You think you can scare me into silence? No, Julian said, but I can bury you in court. A long pause. Then Gary turned, walked toward the elevator without a word. Julian watched him disappear, heart pounding. Elena was already dialing 911, reporting the meeting. Not the deal, just the man. A restraining order would follow. So would security details. Lock upgrades. Cameras, but none of it undid what had been done. Lucas had been seen. Marked. He was no longer invisible. As they rode the elevator up together, Julian finally said it. I should have been there. Elena looked at him. You still can be, but not as a savior. He nodded. Then how? She didn't answer, because that was a question only time could answer. The glass shattered just after midnight. Elena woke to the sound of it, sharp, violent, wrong. For a second she thought it was a dream. Then came the creak of a floorboard that did not belong to her. She shot up in bed, heart in her throat, and instinctively grabbed her phone. Lucas slept beside her in the twin bed they shared in the temporary apartment Julian had helped secure after the incident. She placed a shaking hand on his back, still breathing, still asleep. She stepped out quietly, barefoot, phone already dialing. Julian answered on the first ring. He's here. Julian didn't wait. He had memorized the route. By the time his car skidded into the alley behind the building, the front door had already been kicked in. He rushed inside without thinking. No plan, just adrenaline. He found Gary Trent in the kitchen, standing beneath the harsh yellow bulb with a knife in one hand and a look in his eyes that belonged to a man already lost. You don't get to hide him from the world, Gary shouted, spit flying. Put it down, Julian said, stepping forward. You abandoned them. You made this mess. I'm just the one sweeping it up. Julian held his hands out, eyes calm. You want to be remembered? This isn't how. Gary lunged. Julian moved faster. The struggle was short, brutal, clumsy. The knife slashed Julian's shoulder before it clattered to the floor. He pinned Gary against the wall just as red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Sirens, then shouting, then silence. At the hospital, Julian sat with stitches along his shoulder, a white bandage stark against his skin. Across from him, Elena cradled Lucas, who was finally asleep in her lap again. She didn't speak at first, then, "You could have died. So could you." She looked at him, not like a lover, not like an enemy, like someone exhausted by survival. "You can't protect us from everything," she said. "I know," he replied. "So what are you really offering?" Julian hesitated, then spoke carefully. "To be a father. Not the one I was afraid of becoming. The one he needs now. The one I should have been before." She stared at him for a long time. "And when the next storm comes, then we face it, together." She looked down at Lucas, then back at Julian. No answer, just a tear that fell quietly down her cheek. Because this wasn't an ending. This was a beginning, and beginnings hurt too. The new apartment was quieter. 3 floors up, 2 bedrooms, no history. It had wide windows that faced east, letting the morning light spill across the hardwood floors like something sacred. A small bookshelf stood in the corner, stacked with picture books, sketch pads, and a growing collection of plastic dinosaurs. Lucas had named each one. Elena didn't leave a forwarding address the last time she moved. This time she sent Julian the lease agreement. No threats, no lawyers. Just a copy, unsigned, but understood. The judge didn't grant joint custody. Not yet. But after reviewing the incident, the letters, and the months of court-mandated parenting evaluations, the decision came down: supervised visitation, weekly, neutral location. It wasn't what Julian hoped for, but it was something. And after everything, something was sacred. Every Friday at 3 p.m., Julian met Lucas at the children's garden on the west side of Central Park. He arrived early, sat on the same bench, and waited with a book in hand, a different one each time. Sometimes he read, sometimes he didn't. Lucas always arrived with a new question. Why do pigeons walk like that? What's Wi-Fi? Do you know how many teeth T-Rex had? Julian always tried to answer. Not perfectly, but honestly. He never brought toys or gifts, just presents, just time. At night, he wrote letters, one every Sunday. He didn't mail them. Not all of them. Some stayed tucked in a wooden box on his nightstand, waiting for a day when Lucas might ask for them. He wrote about everything: his own father's coldness, his fear of becoming a man with power and no love. The first time he heard Lucas laugh. He described what it felt like to hold him in the hospital that night, after the knife, after the sirens, after the walls between them finally broke. He never asked for forgiveness. He only wrote truth. Elena painted again, but slower now. Her new work was softer. Less about shadows, more about light entering from broken places. She sold fewer pieces. She cared less. One day, Julian visited a small exhibit in a Brooklyn cafe where she'd hung 2 of her canvases. One was a child on a swing, arms outstretched, to the sky. The other, a man kneeling in a field of fog, his shadow reaching behind him, touching the hand of a child who wasn't there. The title read, Learning How to Stay. Julian never asked her to come back, and she never asked him to leave. They didn't define what they were, but they both showed up, at school orientations, at dentist appointments, at the first time Lucas scraped his knee so badly he cried until both their shirts were soaked with tears. And that was enough. For now. On Lucas's 7th birthday, he opened a box from Julian. Inside was a framed note written in clean, even handwriting. I wasn't there when you took your first breath, but I'll be here when you fall, when you rise, and when you ask the hard questions. I will never run again. Elena read it in the kitchen while Lucas slept. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. But she placed it on the mantel and let it stay. The past was unforgivable, but some truths, when faced, become the only way forward. If you felt connected to this story, please like, share, and let us know your city or country below. The end.